"Where are my children, Olivia?" The words left my mouth before I even had a chance to put my briefcase down. The silence that greeted me when I walked through the door was wrong. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that had no place in a home usually filled with the sounds of 8-year-old Mason arguing about video games and 6-year-old Ava humming off-key to a cartoon theme song. The air was still. The house was too clean, too perfect, like a showroom no one actually lived in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the dead quiet. I found my wife in the living room. She was sitting perfectly straight on the cream-colored sofa we had spent 3 weekends picking out, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Olivia looked like a stranger. She was wearing a tailored navy blue dress I had only seen her wear to corporate events, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. There were no laugh lines around her eyes. She looked up at me, her expression as smooth and unreadable as glass. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She just watched me as if I were a mildly interesting specimen she was observing from a distance. "They're with my mother," she said. Her voice was calm, level, and utterly devoid of the warmth I had known for 15 years. I thought it would be best if they weren't here for this. For what, I asked, my voice tight. I took a step closer, my travel fatigue vanishing, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Liv, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the glass coffee table in front of her. My eyes followed her gaze. Lying there, squared perfectly with the edge of the table, was a thick stack of documents. The top page was clipped and formal, and even from across the room I could read the 2 words that made the floor drop out from under me. Dissolution of marriage. A laugh escaped my throat. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Okay, very funny. Is this some kind of sick joke? Payback for me being away for a week. I walked over and picked up the papers, the heavy weight of them feeling obscene in my hands. I flipped through them. Page after page of legal jargon, financial statements, and declarations. My signature was forged on documents I had never seen. My life was being dissected and dismantled in cold, black ink. "This isn't real," I whispered, looking at her, pleading with my eyes for her to drop the act. "Olivia, stop this. Whatever I did, whatever you think I did, we can talk about it. We can fix it. We always fix it. For 15 years, that had been our motto. We had weathered job losses, family illnesses, and the stress of raising 2 young children. We were, Liam and Olivia, we were solid. We were forever. There is nothing to fix," she stated, her voice unwavering. "The woman I loved, the girl I met in college, the mother of my children was gone. In her place was this cold, polished automaton. It's over, Liam. Over." The word felt foreign, impossible. Just like that. No warning. No fight. Nothing. "You let me kiss you goodbye at the airport a week ago. You told me you loved me. Was that a lie?" She finally showed a flicker of something, a slight tightening of her jaw. "I did what was necessary. Necessary for what I demanded," my voice rising, the papers trembling in my hand. "To destroy our family, to take my children away from me. Why are you doing this?" I threw the papers down on the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. I knelt in front of her, taking her hands in mine. They were cold as ice. "Liv, please. Talk to me. This isn't you. Someone is making you do this. Tell me what's wrong." She pulled her hands away from mine slowly and deliberately, as if my touch repulsed her. She stood up, smoothing down her perfect dress, and looked down at me, not with hatred, not with sadness, but with a chilling, detached pity. "You still don't get it," she said softly. "You think this is about something you did. An argument we could have had. A mistake you could apologize for." She shook her head, a slow, final motion. "This has nothing to do with what you've done, Liam. It has everything to do with who you are, who I am." The question hung in the air between us, heavy and meaningless. "What is that supposed to mean, Liv? I'm the same man you married. I'm the father of your children." Before she could answer, a man I had never seen before stepped out from the hallway that led to my home office. He was in his late 40s, dressed in an expensive suit that looked like it was made of woven shadows. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and moved with the silent, predatory confidence of a shark. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't family. He was a professional here to execute a job. "Mr. Morrison," the man said, his voice smooth and devoid of any sympathy. My name is Arthur Vance. I represent your wife in this matter. Perhaps I can clarify the situation for you." He placed his briefcase on the dining table, opening it with two sharp clicks that echoed like gunshots in the silent house. He slid a thick, bound folder across the polished wood towards me. "If you would." My hands felt like lead. I didn't want to touch it. I knew that whatever was inside that folder was poison, a carefully constructed narrative designed to ruin me. But I had to know. I had to see the weapon she was using to tear my world apart. I opened it. The first section was labeled Financial Misconduct. It was a collection of bank statements from an account in my name at a bank I'd never heard of. The statements showed a pattern of large weekly cash withdrawals, all made from ATMs near casinos in Indiana and Wisconsin. There were tens of thousands of dollars unaccounted for. "This is insane," I stammered, flipping through the pages. "I've never opened this account. This isn't my signature. Someone faked this." Mr. Vance simply raised an eyebrow. "A handwriting analyst retained by our firm confirmed the signature is a match, Mr. Morrison. It would be considered conclusive in a court of law." He pointed to the next tab labeled Illicit Communications. My blood ran cold. It was a series of printed emails supposedly from a private account of mine addressed to several individuals with names like Silas and Rook. The emails were desperate pleading for extensions on loans, promising to pay back exorbitant amounts of interest. They painted a picture of a man drowning in debt, a man so deep in a hole that he was becoming a danger to himself and his family. I had never written these words. I had never heard of these people. "Olivia, look at me," I begged, my voice cracking. I turned away from the folder, trying to find a flicker of the woman I knew in her eyes. "You know me. You know I would never do this. We share everything. You see all my accounts. You know this is a lie. The lies are what I'm seeing now, Liam," she replied, her voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "The evidence speaks for itself. How could you be so reckless, putting Mason and Ava at risk with people like this?" The final section was the most damning. It was a collection of photographs, grainy long lens shots of me. In one, I was in a parking garage talking to a man with a scarred face. I vaguely remembered him. He had asked me for directions a few weeks ago. In another, I was handing cash to a man outside a coffee shop. It was a $20 bill I had given to a homeless man. But taken out of context, framed by the narrative of the emails and bank statements, the images looked sinister. They looked like clandestine meetings. They looked like payoffs. They looked like the actions of a guilty man. I felt the room begin to spin. Every piece of evidence was a perfectly crafted lie, a distortion of reality so skillful that it felt more real than the truth. It was a frame job so complete and so thorough that I had no way to defend myself. "Who did this?" I whispered, looking from Olivia to the lawyer. "Who would go to all this trouble?" Mr. Vance ignored my question. He reached back into his briefcase and pulled out one final document. He slid it across the table. It was different from the others. It had the seal of the state of Illinois at the top. "Given the evidence of your escalating gambling addiction, your association with known lenders of questionable repute, and the potential danger you pose to your children, my client has been granted an emergency protective order," the lawyer said, his tone final. "Effective immediately, you are legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Ms. Morrison or your children, Mason and Ava Morrison. You are required to vacate these premises now. A police officer is waiting outside to ensure a peaceful transition." That was the moment my heart truly broke. It wasn't about the house or the money or even the lies. It was the calculated cruelty of using the law to sever me from my own children. They had taken my name, my reputation, and now they were taking the only thing that mattered. "No," I said the word, a raw, ragged sound from deep in my chest. "You can't. They're my kids. Olivia, you can't do this to them. You can't do this to us." For the first time, I saw her composure crack. Her lower lip trembled for a fraction of a second, but then her eyes hardened again, becoming cold, impenetrable shields. She turned away from me, facing the large window that looked out over the yard where I had taught my son how to throw a baseball. "It's already done," she said. "The court agrees that you are a danger. You need to leave, Liam, for their sake." "For their sake," I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You stand there in the house I bought after showing me a mountain of lies you built to destroy me, and you have the audacity to say this is for their sake. You are taking them away from their father, Olivia." What could possibly be worse for them than that? My plea, my anger, it all just washed over her without leaving a mark. She was a fortress, and she had raised every wall, locked every gate. The lawyer, Mr. Vance, cleared his throat, a polite signal that my time was up. I was getting ready to serve dinner to my in-laws when my daughter told me something that made me drop everything. I found myself saying, the memory surfacing from a happier time just a few months ago. Ava came running to me crying because Mason had told her monsters were real. Do you remember what I did, Liv? I didn't just tell her he was wrong. I spent an hour drawing silly pictures of friendly monsters who loved to read bedtime stories and eat cookies. Her tears turned into laughter. That's the kind of danger I am to my children. The memory seemed to cause a small crack in her armor. She flinched just for a moment, but Mr. Vance stepped forward, placing himself slightly between us. Mr. Morrison. Your personal anecdotes are irrelevant, he said coolly. The court order is absolute. It's time for you to leave. No, I said, shaking my head, a desperate defiance rising within me. This is my house. I paid the mortgage. I painted these walls. My children's height charts are marked on the door frame in the kitchen. You can't just erase me. Olivia let out a short, bitter laugh. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. Your house, she said, the words dripping with a venom I never knew she possessed. Oh, Liam. You really haven't been paying attention at all, have you? She walked over to the built-in bookcase and retrieved a thin file I didn't recognize. She opened it and spread the documents on the coffee table right over the pile of lies that had already condemned me. Do you remember about 6 months ago when you were so busy with the launch of your new project, working 18-hour days, sleeping at the office? You were so proud. I remembered. It was the biggest project of my career. I had poured everything into it. What about it? I told you our mortgage lender offered us a fantastic refinancing rate. She continued, her voice clinical like a doctor describing a terminal illness. A lower interest rate, cash out for renovations. I told you it would secure our future. All you had to do was sign the papers. You were tired. You were stressed. You trusted me. And you signed every single page without reading a word. She tapped a finger on one of the documents. It was a deed transfer. My signature was at the bottom, legally notarized. I had signed my own home away to her. Every penny of equity I had built over a decade gone with a flick of a pen. And your startup, she went on, the cruelty escalating as if she was enjoying watching me break. Your brilliant little tech company that was going to change the world. You made me a majority partner years ago, a gesture of love, you said. A safety net. Last month, using my authority as that partner, I accepted a buyout offer. A very generous one, in fact. The funds were deposited into an account that is solely in my name. The air left my lungs. I felt dizzy, sick. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a complete and total liquidation of my existence. She hadn't just left me. She had plundered my life, taking every single thing of value, leaving behind nothing but a hollowed-out shell. The man I was 20 minutes ago, a successful project manager, a homeowner, a husband, a father, was gone. He had been a fiction. And I was what was left. Nothing. Why? The word was barely a whisper. It was the only question left. It was the only thing I needed to understand. We had built a life together, a beautiful life. Or so I had thought. What could possibly motivate someone to not just end a marriage, but to systematically annihilate the person they had promised to love forever after all our years, after everything we shared? Why do this? Why this hatred? What did I ever do to you that deserved this? I finally looked her directly in the eyes, searching for an answer. And what I saw terrified me. It wasn't hatred. Hatred is a passionate emotion. It comes from a place of caring that has been wounded. This was something else entirely. It was cold, calculated indifference. It was the look of a person completing a task. I had been a project, an assignment, and now I was finished. She walked to the front door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She opened it, and I could see the uniformed police officer standing patiently on the porch, a silent enforcer of my new reality. Olivia paused at the doorway, her back to me. She was about to deliver the final blow, the answer that would haunt me, that would follow me out into the cold night. You asked me why, she said, her voice quiet, but each word was a perfectly sharpened blade. You think this is about something you did, an argument we could have had, a mistake you could apologize for. You've always been so naive. She finally turned her face, framed by the doorway, her expression a mask of finality. This was never about what you've done, Liam. It has everything to do with who you are. and where you come from." And with that, she stepped outside, closing the door behind her, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of a house full of ghosts. I was no longer a husband. I was no longer a father in practice. I was a stranger in my own life, kicked out into the darkness with nothing but a cryptic, impossible riddle as my severance. My life as I knew it was over. The only thing I didn't know was why it had ever truly begun. The officer was polite. He didn't put his hand on his weapon or speak to me in a harsh tone. He simply stood by my old pickup truck, its faded blue paint a stark contrast to the sleek SUVs in my neighbors' driveways, and waited. He was a quiet, uniformed statue marking the boundary of my old life. I walked past him, not making eye contact, and climbed into the driver's seat. The familiar smell of old coffee and worn fabric was a comfort and an insult at the same time. This truck, the one Olivia had been begging me to sell for years, was now the only home I had left. I turned the key and the engine rumbled to life with a familiar, comforting growl. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw a light flick on in my children's bedroom. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was them, but it was just Olivia moving through the house, a ghost in the life we had built. I pressed my foot on the gas and didn't look back. The first hour was a blur of highways and numb disbelief. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a deep, aching void. My mind raced, trying to find a foothold of logic in the landslide that had just buried me. A frame job. It had to be. But the complexity, the sheer malice of it was staggering. And Olivia, her coldness was the part I couldn't comprehend. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. This was a premeditated execution of our life together. My first rational thought was to call her parents. Carol and Jean had always treated me like a son. They loved Mason and Ava more than anything. They would listen. They would help me understand. I pulled up their number, my thumb hovering over the call button, a sliver of hope fluttering in my chest. Carol answered on the second ring. "Liam, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice filled with its usual warmth. "Carol, no, not at all," I said, relief washing over me. "Something terrible is happening. Olivia is... she's leaving me. She's making these wild accusations. She won't let me see the kids. I think she's in some kind of trouble." The line went silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by a brittle chill that mirrored her daughter's. "Olivia told us you've been having some problems, Liam, with gambling. We're very disappointed. Our only concern right now is the safety of our grandchildren." "What?" "No, Carol, that's not true. It's all a lie, a setup. You know me better than that." "We thought we did," she said, and the finality in her tone was like a door slamming shut in my face. "Please respect Olivia's wishes and don't call here again." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling. Disappointed. The word echoed in my skull. They believed her. Of course they did. She was their daughter. I was just the outsider, the man who was now a liability. I tried calling my best friend Mark. We had known each other since we were teenagers. He was Mason's godfather. He'd know this was all a lie. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I sent him a frantic text. "Mark, it's Liam. I'm in serious trouble. Call me." Minutes ticked by. Nothing. She had gotten to them all. She had poisoned the well, isolating me before I even knew a war had been declared. I drove until the fuel light came on, pulling into a desolate, brightly lit gas station somewhere on the Illinois-Indiana border. The fluorescent lights made everything look sick and pale. I sat in my truck for a long time, the engine off the silence, now my only companion. I scrolled through the photos on my phone. Mason at his last baseball game, grinning with a smear of dirt on his cheek. Ava in her princess costume from Halloween, her arms wrapped around my neck. These weren't just pictures. They were proof. Proof of a life, of a love that I was now being told was a complete fabrication built on a foundation of my own degeneracy. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek. I was out of money, my cards had been blocked. I was out of friends. I was out of family. I was completely and utterly alone. As I sat there wallowing in the deepest pit of despair I had ever known, my phone buzzed. It was a call. The screen read unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it. What was the point? But a desperate, foolish flicker of hope made me answer. Maybe it was Mark. Maybe it was Olivia having a change of heart. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse. The line was quiet for a moment, just the faint hiss of static. Then a voice spoke, and it was like nothing I had ever heard. It was low and gravelly, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. It held no emotion, no anger, no sympathy. It was the voice of pure, cold function. "Liam Morrison," the voice said. It wasn't a question. "Who is this?" I demanded, sitting up straighter. "That doesn't matter," the voice rumbled. "What matters is that you listen. Stop calling people. Your friends can't help you. Your wife's family won't help you. They've all been told a story and they believe it. You're wasting your time." My blood ran cold. He knew. He knew I had been making calls. The feeling of being watched, of being a pawn in a game I didn't understand, intensified. "What do you want?" "Who are you working for?" "I'm not working for anyone you know," the voice said, a hint of something that might have been amusement in the gravelly tone. "I'm offering you the only path you have left. You want answers? You want to see your kids again?" "Yes," I breathed the word a prayer, more than anything. "Then do exactly as I say. Get in your truck. Drive east. Don't stop until you get to Lakewood, Ohio. Go to your mother's house on Marlowe Avenue. Go inside, lock the doors, and wait. Do not talk to anyone. Do not call anyone. Just go there and wait. Is that clear?" The instructions were so specific, so bizarre, that they had the ring of truth. Lakewood. My mother's house. A place I hadn't seen in 3 years. A place filled with nothing but dust and ghosts. What could possibly be waiting for me there? Why, I asked. "Why there?" "The answers you're looking for are not in Chicago," the voice said. "They've been waiting for you in Ohio for a very long time." Before I could ask another question, the line went dead. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, my mind reeling. It was insane. A cryptic call from a stranger telling me to drive halfway across the country to a dead woman's house. It could be a trap. It could be a cruel joke. But as I looked around at the cold, indifferent lights of the gas station, at the life I had just lost, I knew I had no other choice. It was the only thread I had. It was the only direction anyone had given me in a world that had suddenly become a map with no roads. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The old engine roared to life. I was no longer running away from my life. I was driving towards an unknown past, hoping it held the key to a future I could still save. The city lights of Chicago bled into the rearview mirror, shrinking from a brilliant, sprawling constellation into a faint, distant glow, and then vanished completely. I was surrounded by the profound darkness of the Indiana interstate at night, with only the twin beams of my headlights cutting a path through the black. The truck rumbled on a faithful, aging beast, carrying me away from the ruins of my life and towards... what a ghost. A memory. An answer I didn't know. All I had was a stranger's voice, a cryptic destination, and 6 hours of open road to confront the man I used to be and the boy I had long forgotten. As the miles dissolved under my tires, my mind, with nowhere else to go, drifted backwards. It bypassed the fresh, searing wound of Olivia's betrayal and traveled further to a time of quiet stability, to a life defined by one person, my mother Eleanor. In my memory, she always seemed to be surrounded by a soft, gentle light, like the reading lamps in the library where she worked. She was a woman made of quiet moments and unspoken strength. I could picture her perfectly sitting in her favorite armchair, a book open in her lap, her brow furrowed in concentration. She smelled of old paper, Earl Grey tea, and the faint, sweet scent of lavender soap. She was my entire world for so long. After my father died, she became both mother and father, a dual role she filled with a kind of grim, loving determination. The official story was simple, clean, and tragic. My father, a construction worker, had died in a scaffolding collapse when I was 7. I have only a few hazy memories of him, the rough scrape of his beard against my cheek, the sound of his deep laugh, the way he could lift me up to touch the ceiling. His death was the first great silence of my life. My mother rarely spoke of him. When I would ask, she would offer vague, sad platitudes. "He was a good man, Liam. He loved you very much." The subject was always closed with a gentle but firm finality, a door I learned not to knock on. I had accepted it all without question. Kids do. A parent's word is the architecture of their reality. My reality was that my father was gone, and my mother was all I had. She raised me on a librarian's salary, which I now realize was a miracle of quiet sacrifice. We never had much, but I never felt poor. The heat was always on, there was always food on the table, and there were always books. So many books. She taught me that stories were a kind of magic, a way to live 1,000 lives, to understand people you would never meet. Looking back now as the dark fields of rural Indiana slipped past my window, I wondered if she used stories to hide from her own. There was a sadness in my mother's eyes that never quite went away, a constant low-level hum of grief that I had mistaken for simple mourning. Now I wondered if it was something more. Fear, perhaps. Olivia's words echoed in my head, a cruel looping refrain. It has everything to do with who you are, and where you come from. Where did I come from? I came from Lakewood, Ohio. I came from a small 2-bedroom house on Marlowe Avenue. I came from Liam Morrison, the quiet librarian. It was a simple, unassuming origin. How could that be the source of such a violent, orchestrated attack on my life? It made no sense. And yet the stranger on the phone had sent me back to the very beginning, back to the source. As if summoned by the thought, a specific memory, sharp and vivid, broke through the fog of the years. I was 10 years old, a ball of restless energy on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Bored with my toys, I had ventured into the one part of the house that felt like a mysterious, unconquered territory, the basement. It was a place of shadows and strange smells of damp concrete and spiders. In the far corner, squatting like a huge iron beast, was the old furnace. It was a relic from another era, a massive cast-iron contraption with vents and pipes that looked like metallic tentacles. It hadn't been used in decades, but it dominated the room with a silent, intimidating presence. I was fascinated by it. I ran my hand over its cold, rusted surface. I peered into its dark, dusty vents, imagining it roaring to life. I was in the middle of my grand adventure when the basement light flicked on, making me jump. My mother was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her arms crossed. Her face, usually so gentle, was set in a hard, unfamiliar line. "Liam, get away from there," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a sharp, urgent edge I had never heard before. "I was just looking," I said, suddenly feeling like I had been caught doing something terribly wrong. "I don't want you playing down here," she said, walking towards me. "And I especially don't want you going near that furnace. Ever. Do you understand me?" She knelt down in front of me, her grip on my shoulders surprisingly strong. Her eyes, usually soft and gray, were dark, with an intensity that scared me. "Promise me, Liam. Promise me you will never touch it or go near it again." "I promise," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. She searched my face for a moment longer. Then her expression softened, the familiar loving mother returning. She hugged me, a tight, protective embrace. "Good boy," she said. "It's just old and dangerous. I don't want you getting hurt." At the time, her explanation made sense. But now, driving through the night 22 years later, the memory felt different. It wasn't just a mother's concern for safety. It was something deeper. It was a primal fear. She wasn't afraid of me getting hurt by the furnace. She was afraid of the furnace itself. She was afraid of what it represented, or perhaps what it was hiding. The pieces began to click into place, forming a strange and terrifying mosaic in my mind. Olivia's cryptic condemnation of my origins, the mysterious caller directing me back to the one place that held all my history, and now this potent, unearthed memory of my mother's fierce, desperate warning about a forgotten corner of our home. It all pointed to the same place, the basement. A new feeling began to displace the crushing despair. It was a fragile but fierce flicker of purpose. The questions I had were no longer just about Olivia and the life she had destroyed. They were older, deeper. Who was my father really? How did he die? And what secret did my quiet librarian mother guard so fiercely that the memory of it still held a palpable power over me? Decades later, I realized this journey was no longer in exile. I wasn't running from a life that was over. I was driving towards a truth that had been buried for years. The stranger on the phone had offered me a path, and I now knew it didn't just lead to a house in Ohio. It led down a set of rickety wooden stairs into a dark, damp basement and straight towards an old iron furnace that held the key to everything. Marlowe Avenue was exactly as I remembered it, yet completely different. The grand oak trees that lined the street seemed larger, their branches hanging lower, casting the neighborhood in a deeper, more permanent state of twilight. The other houses, once familiar landmarks of my childhood, were now just anonymous buildings. And then I saw it. My mother's house. It looked smaller than it lived in my memory, and sadder. The pale yellow paint was peeling in long, curling strips. The garden my mother had tended with such care was now a riot of overgrown weeds. It was a house that had been left to grieve alone. For a moment I just sat in the truck, the engine idling, a strange reluctance holding me in place. This was the finish line of my desperate journey, but I was suddenly terrified of what I might find, and even more terrified of finding nothing at all. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the truck. The old house key, the one that had been on my key ring for over a decade for reasons I never fully understood, felt heavy and significant in my hand. It slid into the lock with a familiar grating sound. The door swung open on a puff of stale, musty air. It was the scent of trapped time, of dust and decay, and the faint, lingering perfume of my mother's life. I stepped inside and closed the door, plunging myself into the dim, silent world she had left behind. Every piece of furniture was draped in a white sheet, making the living room look like a graveyard of soft, silent ghosts. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, sparkling in the thin shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the stillness. This was the place where I had grown up, where I had learned to read, where I had mourned a father I barely knew. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to a life I no longer recognized as my own. But I didn't let the sorrow distract me. I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for answers, and I knew exactly where I needed to look. The door to the basement was at the end of the kitchen hallway. It was a plain wooden door I had run past thousands of times as a child. Now it felt like the most important door in the world. I turned the cold brass knob and pulled. It opened with a long, drawn-out creak, revealing a set of steep, rickety wooden stairs that descended into absolute darkness. I fumbled for the light switch, a simple pull chain, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, casting a weak yellow glow over the scene below. The basement. Driven by the memory that had blazed in my mind for the entire drive, I went down the stairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and manic hope. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of earth and mildew filled my lungs. The basement was just as I remembered it, a chaotic landscape of forgotten things. Cardboard boxes sagged under the weight of years, labeled in my mother's neat handwriting, Liam's school projects, Christmas decorations, old photographs. My childhood bicycle, now rusted and small, leaned against a wall. It was a cluttered, ordinary basement. For a moment, my resolve wavered. What was I expecting to find? A hidden lever, a secret passage. The thought seemed absurd, the fantasy of a desperate, broken man. I shook off the doubt. I had come this far. I had to see it through. I started my search, moving with a frantic, desperate energy. I pulled boxes away from the walls, my hands growing filthy with grime. I ran my palms over the cool, damp concrete blocks of the foundation, feeling for any loose stones or hidden compartments. I tapped on the walls, listening for the hollow sound of a hidden space. The only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the soft thud of dusty boxes being moved. An hour passed, then another. The basement offered up nothing but spiders and sad, useless relics of a life that was gone. The manic energy began to fade, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of disappointment. The hope that had sustained me on the long drive from Chicago began to feel like a foolish delusion. I sank down onto an old wooden crate, burying my face in my hands. I was a fool. I had chased a 20-year-old memory across 3 states, led by a cryptic phone call from a stranger. It was a ghost story, I had told myself, because the truth that my wife had simply grown to hate me and had orchestrated my ruin was too painful to accept. I thought about Mason and Ava, and a wave of despair so powerful it almost made me physically ill washed over me. They were gone, and I was here in a dusty basement on a fool's errand, farther away from them than ever. I was losing my mind. The strain of it all had finally broken me. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the basement pressing in on me. I was ready to give up. I would go upstairs, lie down on one of the ghost-like sofas, and just stop. But as I lifted my head, my exhausted gaze fell upon the far corner of the room, the furnace. It just sat there, a hulking mass of iron and rust, an ugly, forgotten monument to a bygone era. It looked exactly as it always had. Silent. Immovable. Ordinary. My quest was over. There was nothing here. I was about to push myself to my feet when the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling swayed slightly, perhaps from a draft. The angle of the light shifted, and for a fraction of a second it caught something on the concrete floor, a faint line. I stared, thinking it was a crack in the cement, but it wasn't straight. It was a curve. I crawled over my knees, scraping on the rough floor. I brushed away the thick layer of dust with the side of my hand, and then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. They were scratches, faint, shallow grooves carved into the surface of the concrete. They weren't random. They formed two perfect parallel arcs on the floor. I looked at the heavy cast iron feet of the furnace. The arcs on the floor matched their position exactly. It was the unmistakable trace of something immensely heavy being dragged, scraped across the floor, and then moved back. Someone had moved this furnace. Someone had moved this thing that must have weighed half a ton. It wasn't a delusion. The memory wasn't a trick of my mind. It was real. Something was hidden here, and I was standing right on top of it. The scratches on the concrete were a revelation. They were a map, a silent testament from the past, confirming that my desperate hope was not a delusion. The despair that had crippled me just moments before evaporated, replaced by a surge of raw electric adrenaline. I was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of lies. I was a detective who had just found the crucial clue. The furnace, which had been a symbol of my failure, was now the centerpiece of my investigation. It was the X on the treasure map, and I would move it if it was the last thing I ever did. My first attempts were laughable. I placed my hands on its cold iron flank and pushed. It was like trying to move a mountain. The furnace didn't budge a millimeter. It was rooted to the spot, a silent iron sentinel that had guarded its secret for decades. I needed leverage. My eyes scanned the cluttered basement and landed on a long, heavy iron pipe, probably a remnant from some long-forgotten plumbing repair. It was perfect. I wedged one end of the pipe into a small crevice in the furnace's base and pushed the other end against the concrete wall, creating a makeshift lever. I put my entire weight against it. The pipe groaned in protest, the metal straining. I felt a slight shift, a deep, grinding shudder that vibrated up through the pipe and into my bones. It had moved. Barely an inch, but it had moved. The next hour was a brutal, grueling battle of man versus iron. I was drenched in sweat, my muscles screaming, my hands raw and blistered. The air in the basement was thick with the smell of rust and my own desperate exertion. Each push with the lever gained me only an inch or two, accompanied by the agonizing shriek of metal scraping against concrete. It was a slow, punishing process. There were moments I thought I would fail, that my body would give out before the secret was revealed. In those moments, I thought of Mason and Ava. I pictured their faces, their smiles. I thought of Olivia's cold, dismissive eyes. That image, the memory of her calculated cruelty, fueled me. It became a fire in my gut, burning away the pain and exhaustion. This wasn't just about moving a piece of metal. This was about reclaiming my life. This was me pushing back against the immense, immovable weight of the lies that had crushed me. Finally, with one last guttural roar of effort, I managed to pivot the furnace far enough away from the wall to reveal the space behind it. I collapsed against a stack of old boxes, my chest heaving, my body trembling with exhaustion, but I felt no pain. All I felt was a profound, triumphant thrill. I had won. I crawled into the newly opened space, the beam of my phone's flashlight cutting through the thick, ancient cobwebs. The back wall looked like the rest of the foundation, a simple wall of old gray bricks. For a heart-stopping second, I thought I had been wrong. But then I saw it. One brick. It was a slightly different color, a shade darker than the others, and the mortar around it was newer, less crumbled. It had been placed there after the rest of the wall was built. My heart hammered in my chest. With trembling fingers, I pressed against the brick. It didn't move. I pushed harder, wiggling it back and forth. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to loosen. I pulled it free, the rough brick scraping my knuckles. Behind it was not a hollow space, but the flat, dark surface of a metal box set flush into the wall. It was a small, heavy-duty safe, the kind you might see in a hotel room, but older, stronger. It had a simple 4-digit combination lock. A new wave of frustration washed over me. I had come so far only to be stopped by a lock I had no key for. My mind raced. A combination. It had to be something my mother would remember, something significant to her. I tried the obvious numbers first. My birthday, August 12th. 1208. Nothing. Her birthday, May 20th. 0520. Nothing. The year I was born, 1990. Nothing. The year my father supposedly died. 1987. Nothing. I tried every combination of significant dates I could think of, my hope diminishing with each failed attempt. I was so close. The answer to everything was inches away, locked inside a metal box. I sat back on my heels, defeated, staring at the impassive keypad. What had I missed? What secret number did she hold so close? I closed my eyes, trying to think, trying to picture her. And then a memory surfaced, not a dramatic one, but a small, quiet, recurring moment from my childhood. It was my birthday. Not the parties or the presents, but a specific private ritual she had. She didn't believe in big, expensive gifts. Instead, every year on August 12th, she would give me one single, beautifully wrapped book. It was always a classic, something she believed I needed to read. And she would always inscribe it the same way, not happy birthday, but simply, for Liam. Chapter 12, page 8. It was her little joke. Chapter 12 for the 12th day, page 8 for the 8th month. It was her secret code, a message of love written just for me. My eyes snapped open. A code. I looked at the lock. It wasn't about the date itself, it was about her message. Chapter 12. Page 8. I leaned forward. My fingers suddenly steady, a profound sense of certainty washing over me. This was it. I punched in the numbers, not as a date, but as a message from my mother across the years. 1, 2, 0, 8. For a moment there was silence. Then, with a loud, definitive click that echoed in the small, dusty space, the lock disengaged. The small metal door sprang open. The click of the lock echoed in the silence, a sound of finality, of revelation. For a moment, I just stared at the small, open metal door, my breath held tight in my chest. Everything I had endured, the destruction of my life, the long, dark drive, the brutal struggle with the furnace had led to this single moment. My hand trembled as I reached into the dark space, my fingers brushing against a thick, paper-wrapped bundle. I pulled it out. It was a dense brick of cash, mostly $100 bills held together by a simple rubber band. A few months ago, this amount of money would have been a life-changing sum. Now it felt like a footnote, a practical but ultimately meaningless artifact. It wasn't the answer I was looking for. Beneath the cash was a large, sealed manila envelope. I dumped its contents onto the dusty floor. A few old black and white photographs of people I didn't recognize, a social security card, and a folded, official-looking document. I picked up the document and unfolded it. It was a birth certificate from the state of Ohio. My birth date was correct. My mother's name, Eleanor Rossi, was listed. My father's name was listed as Anthony Rossi. And at the top, in bold official lettering, was the name of the child, Liam Rossi. I stared at my own face, my 10-year-old school picture laminated onto a state ID card that also bore that name, Rossi. It wasn't a name I had ever heard before, but looking at it, I felt a strange, unsettling flicker of recognition deep in my bones, like an echo from a life I had never lived. Who was Liam Rossi? The question hammered at my brain, but my identity crisis was cut short by the final item from the box. It was a simple white envelope sealed with a piece of old yellowed tape. My name, Liam, was written on the front in my mother's familiar, elegant handwriting. This was it, the real treasure, the key to understanding the wreckage of my life. With shaking hands, I tore it open and began to read. My dearest Liam. The letter began, and I could hear her voice in my head as clear as if she were standing beside me in the dusty basement. It was the calm, steady voice that had read me 1,000 bedtime stories, now telling me the one story that had always been kept secret. If you are reading this, it means the past has finally caught up to us, and I am no longer there to protect you. There are things you need to know. A truth I have carried alone for 35 years. I am so sorry, my son, for the weight of these words, but you deserve to know who you are and where you come from. Our name is not Morrison. It is Rossi. Your father, Anthony. Rossi was not a construction worker. He was a brilliant accountant, the smartest man I ever knew. But he was young and ambitious, and he made a terrible mistake. He went to work for the wrong people. A powerful, ruthless crime family out of Cleveland known as the Falcone family. He told himself it was just numbers away to provide for us. But he saw too much, and his conscience, the good man I knew, was always inside him, couldn't bear the weight of their crimes. I had to stop reading, my head spinning. A crime family. My father. It sounded like something out of a movie. A fiction that had no place in the quiet suburban life I had always known. I looked at the old photographs on the floor. A handsome, dark-haired man with a brilliant smile, his arm around a young, happy version of my mother. My father, Anthony Rossi, a man I was meeting for the first time. I continued reading. He decided to get out. But more than that, he decided to make it right. He went to the FBI. He had ledgers, records, everything the government needed to dismantle the entire Falcone operation. He was set to be the star witness in a massive federal case. But they found out. The day before he was scheduled to give his deposition, they arranged an accident at a construction site he was supposedly visiting. He wasn't just killed, Liam, he was silenced. And I was the only loose end left, the only other person who knew what he knew, who knew where he had hidden the original ledgers. I ran. I took you, my beautiful 7-year-old boy, and I ran. The U.S. Marshals put us into the witness protection program. We became the Morrisons. We moved to Lakewood. I became a quiet librarian. And you got to have a life. A normal, safe life. That was all I ever wanted. I buried Eleanor Rossi and became Eleanor Morrison, and every single day for 35 years I have lived in fear that they would find us, that they would take you from me too. The pieces of my life slotted into place with a horrifying clarity. My mother's perpetual sadness, her quiet, watchful nature, her fierce, inexplicable fear of the furnace. It wasn't just grief she carried, it was the constant crushing terror of being discovered. The quiet life she had built for us was not a choice. It was a fortress, and she was the lonely guard on its walls. The final paragraphs of the letter were the ones that shattered me completely. I always watched them from a distance, Liam. I had to. I needed to know if they were looking for us. That is how I learned about Olivia. Her family had old ties to the Falcone's, debts of loyalty that went back generations. When you started dating her, my blood ran cold. I wanted to scream to pull you away, but how could I? How could I explain a danger I had spent your entire life pretending didn't exist? I prayed they would never make the connection. For 15 years it seemed my prayers were answered, but they finally found you. I don't know how. And they used her. They must have threatened her, or her family, using your own children as leverage. They have destroyed your life for one reason. They believe your father's original ledger, the one piece of evidence that can still destroy them, is hidden somewhere in this house. They tore apart your life in Chicago to force you back here, hoping that you, your father's son, would be the one person who could find it. I dropped the letter, the thin pages fluttering to the floor. The carefully constructed reality of my life, my marriage, my family had been a lie. Olivia wasn't a monster who had suddenly turned on me. She was a pawn, a weapon being used against me by the same faceless evil that had murdered my father. My children were not just taken from me, they were hostages. And I had been manipulated, herded back to this very spot, to this very basement, to uncover a secret I never knew existed. I was not a husband betrayed. I was the son of Anthony Rossi. And his war, the one he had died fighting, had just become mine. I sat on the cold, damp concrete of the basement floor, the world I knew in ruins around me. The air was thick with the dust of 35 years of secrets. My hands rested on my knees, one near the thick brick of cash, the other near the small, unassuming letter that had detonated my entire reality. I was no longer Liam Morrison, the boringly normal project manager from Chicago. I was Liam Rossi, the son of a man murdered by the mob, the son of a woman who had lived her entire life looking over her shoulder. My entire identity, the bedrock on which I had built my life, had been a carefully constructed lie designed to protect me from a truth I never knew existed. And now the walls of that lie had come crashing down, leaving me exposed, raw, and faced with an impossible choice. My mother's letter presented the two paths with a mother's heartbreaking love and clarity. Path one was the money. It was a substantial amount, more than enough to disappear. I could walk out of this house, get in my truck, and drive until I ran out of road. I could change my name again, find a small, quiet town somewhere in the mountains or by the ocean, and start over. I could build a new life, a simple one free from the shadows that had haunted my family for generations. No one would blame me. My mother's own words had given me permission. You deserve to live a life of peace. It was the ultimate gift a parent could give their child, an escape route. Freedom. Safety. Path 2 was the key. It was a small, old-fashioned safe deposit box key, the kind made of solid, heavy brass. It felt cold and dangerous in my hand. This path was not one of escape. It was a path of confrontation. It led not to a quiet town, but back into the heart of the storm. It led to a bank vault, to a ledger, and to a war that had been waged in the shadows long before I was born. This was the path of justice, of retribution. It was the path my father had chosen, and it had cost him his life. It was the path my mother had run from a decision that had cost her a lifetime of peace. And now the choice was mine. I picked up the stack of cash. The bills were crisp, real. I could feel the weight of the safety they represented. I could almost picture it, a small apartment somewhere in Oregon, the smell of the ocean, a simple job, the quiet anonymity of being a stranger. No one would know my name. No one would be looking for me. The Falcone family would have their dead end. They would assume the trail had gone cold with my mother. I would be a ghost, a free man. But what kind of freedom would it be? I pictured my children's faces, Mason's gap-toothed grin, and Ava's serious, thoughtful eyes. A life of peace without them would not be peace at all. It would be a different kind of prison, a life sentence of solitary confinement haunted every single day by the memory of the family I had abandoned. My hand closed around the key. It was heavy with the weight of consequence. To choose this path was to walk willingly into danger. These were not characters in a movie. They were real, ruthless people who had murdered my father and systematically destroyed my life without a second thought. They had my children. To fight them would be to risk everything, including my own life. My mother's letter had been clear. "This is not my burden to place upon you," she had written. "It is your choice." She had run to protect me. Could I now in good conscience run towards the very danger she had saved me from? The conflict raged inside me, a silent, violent storm in the stillness of the basement. The desire for self-preservation, the primal instinct to flee from danger, was a powerful current pulling me towards the money, towards escape. But a stronger, deeper current was pulling me in the opposite direction. It was the love for my children. The thought of them growing up in the shadow of this criminal enterprise, their lives potentially manipulated and controlled by the same people who had used their mother as a pawn, was unbearable. Olivia, was she a victim too? The letter suggested as much. If I ran, I wasn't just abandoning my children to the Falcones. I was abandoning her as well. Despite the venom and the betrayal, the memory of the woman I had loved for 15 years was still there, a ghost limb that ached with a phantom pain. This was what they had counted on. The Falcones. Olivia, the stranger on the phone. They had stripped me of everything, believing that a man with nothing left to lose would be reckless, desperate, and easy to manipulate. They herded me back to this house, to this exact spot, certain that I would uncover this secret for them. They thought they had broken me, but they had miscalculated. They hadn't broken me. They had awakened something within me I never knew existed. A strength forged not in boardrooms and project deadlines, but in a mother's secret sacrifice and a father's forgotten courage. They thought I was Liam Morrison, the soft suburban dad, but I was Liam Rossi. And I finally understood what that meant. It meant I could not run. It meant I could not hide. My father had died trying to do the right thing. My mother had sacrificed her entire life to protect the legacy of that choice. Her running was not an act of cowardice. It was an act of profound strategic love, a 35-year-long mission to keep me safe until I was ready. And now I was. Choosing to run would be to dishonor both of their sacrifices. It would be to let the Falcones win, to let them extinguish the last light of the Rossi family forever. The choice became clear. The internal storm subsided, leaving a calm, cold certainty in its wake. There was only one path. There had only ever been one path. I looked from the stack of money, a monument, to a safe and empty future, to the small brass key that represented a dangerous and uncertain one. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was a clarification. It was the moment I had to decide what kind of man I was, not just for myself, but for the two small children whose faces were imprinted on my soul. A life of peace bought at the price of abandoning them was a lie. My mother had not raised a coward. She had raised a son, and she had armed him with the truth. My decision was made in the quiet, dusty silence of that basement. I reached out and gently pushed the stack of cash back into the metal box. It was a fortune, but it was also an anchor, and I needed to be free to fight. I then picked up the small brass key. It felt warm in my hand, now no longer a cold piece of metal, but a torch passed down to me through the years. I closed the small metal door, leaving the money and the ghosts of a peaceful life sealed in the darkness. I kept only two things: the key and my mother's letter. I stood up, my legs steady, my body no longer trembling with exhaustion or fear. A profound sense of calm settled over me. The chaos of the last 24 hours, the storm of betrayal and confusion, had passed. And in its wake there was only clarity. I knew who my enemy was, I knew what I had to do, and most importantly, I finally knew who I was. I walked up the creaking basement stairs, my every step firm, deliberate. With each step I felt the weak, broken shell of Liam Morrison falling away, replaced by something harder, something more resilient. Liam Morrison was a man who had things happen to him. He was a victim, a pawn in a game he never knew he was playing. Liam Rossi, however, was a man who was about to make things happen. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused and looked back into the darkness of the basement, the place where I had been reborn. I pulled the chain, and the single bare bulb went out, plunging the past into the blackness where it belonged. I closed the basement door, not with a slam of anger, but with a quiet, definitive click. The past was no longer a place to be feared or run from. It was a source of strength, a weapon. I walked out of the house my mother had used as a sanctuary and stood on the porch, breathing in the cool Ohio night air. The world looked different now. It was no longer a safe, predictable place. It was a battlefield. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready for the fight. They had taken my family. They had taken my name. They had taken my life. Now I was coming to take it all back. The question was no longer what had happened to me. The only question that mattered now was what I was going to do next. Legacy isn't an inheritance you receive. It's a battle you choose to finish. The ghosts of the past don't haunt you. They arm you. True strength is found not in forgetting where you came from, but in facing it head-on to protect where you're going.